Peter Tecklenburg has been Charleston County's auditor for 6 years. In this special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, he talks to me about the latest news in the office, the changes, and the future of the office. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Listen to this interview later on iHeartRadio, and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Peter Tecklenburg, it's so good to see you here.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, anytime. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I know that obviously we just talked off camera a second ago, but it's been 6 years now since you became the Charleston County auditor. What is the biggest difference between 2013 and 2019 in your mind?
Oh, well, we've made a lot of progress. There have been, I think it's taken a lot of time to get to where we are today. You come into one of these offices and you campaign for it, and you really hope to be able to make changes real quickly. But when you're talking about an office like mine, which is very cyclical, and the fact that we have taxes go out at a certain point a year, and so there's certain times a year where we're able to really make changes and do things. It takes a while to see things come to fruition. But I'm really happy that after 6 years now in office, I feel like I can sense and see a lot of the changes that have come in. We've made a lot of progress. We've sort of gone from being a competent and efficient auditor's office and doing the job that the job was, or that the people have and the state have required of my office, to being a leader. And we're doing things and sort of taking some steps that other auditors' offices around the state aren't doing, and trying to take us not only into the 21st century, but to really redefine what the office does.
How do you redefine this office in 2019?
Well, I think the big things are always striving to increase our ability to deal with the public through customer service, technological advancements, technology, anything we can use to help make the process easier for taxpayers. When I started 6 years ago, the idea was to work on accuracy, to make sure we were sending out the correct tax bills, to work on efficiency, to make sure we were spending the money allotted to us properly, and to make sure that we had an emphasis on customer service. So every day we've strived to do that. In 2019, I think one of the things that we really are trying to get across is we've changed the auditor's office from being sort of a clerical office that just calculates and sends out tax bills, to be an office that's really there to help people understand their taxes, to understand what tax breaks or benefits and exemptions they may be eligible for, as well as educating people on how your taxes are being spent and where your money's going. People want to know that, and so we have opportunities on our bills. We have opportunities in public settings, and we go out and speak to groups, and opportunities and other things like this to really show people what our office is doing, and we're proud of being a leader in county government, and not just in Charleston County, but throughout the state.
Throughout the state. You talked earlier about those changes in the auditor's office. What are there right now?
Well, our big project right now we've been working on is a homestead exemption program. In South Carolina, it doesn't matter which county you live in South Carolina, if you're over the age of 65, or if you're permanently disabled, you're entitled to a break on your property taxes. They remove $50,000 worth of value from your appraisal, and so if you lived in a $100,000 home, they'd reduce it down to $50,000. In a $1 million home, it's $950,000. It's $50,000, but that's real money. It equates to about, in Charleston County, it's about $200 to $250. In other counties, it's more. The higher your taxes are, the more the rebate's going to be worth. Luckily, in Charleston, our taxes are a little lower than most other counties. But that being said, it is incumbent upon the taxpayer to apply for that for the exemption. State law mandates that they fill out an application and turn it into the auditor. Educating people about this program is important. That's what we've been working on for the last number of years. We go into community meetings and we talk to folks. I think we did about 30 meetings last year, which is a lot for a county auditor's office. Well, we go to the Black Expo, but we also go to neighborhood associations and everywhere from Ondahl to Edisto, a lot on Johns Island. And we go and we talk to the folks, and what we found is there were a lot of people who were eligible for homestead exemption who were not receiving it. So we'd pick up one or two every time we'd go to one of these meetings, but we thought that there's got to be a better way to find these folks. And so we started doing some research, and it took us actually a number of years because we were working on a couple things with this, but we were able to get a list of everyone in Charleston County over the age of 65. Then we crossed that with folks who already had the exemption, and we crossed that with folks who would have lived on the property. You have to have the property in your name. And we were able to come up with about 5,000 people in Charleston, and this is not including the folks who are disabled that we're still trying to reach out to. We've been working through Social Security and through Joe Cunningham's office. He's been very helpful. But we have about 5,000 folks, and we sent a letter to these 5,000 folks telling them, you are eligible for this homestead exemption program. What you need to do is fill out this application and get back to us. We sent all 5,000 out at the same time, so we got swamped when it came out. We were waiting on a good time of year for us where we sort of had a little bit of time where we really could process these. And folks responded. We had thousands of phone calls. We've sent out and received thousands of homestead applications. They're being processed now. The bottom line, though, is if 2,000 of the 5,000 people even apply, because even though we know these 5,000 people are eligible, they have to apply to get the. It is incumbent on them to fill out the application. I can't just give it to them, even though I know that they meet the criteria. They need to sign it, and they need to prove it as state law, written application. Even if 2,000 of that 5,000 folks did, that's $500,000 in actual tax savings in Charleston County in that 1 year. But the truth is, we know that these folks who say if they're 66, 67 years old, apply for this and get it, most of them will see this exemption for the next 15, 20 years of their lives until they expire, and then their spouse does, maybe even more. So instead of this really just being, well, we saved $500,000, or we saved $1 million if we get 4,000 people to fill out this thing. This thing is going to live on. As soon as you have this exemption, it stays with it as long as you own that house. And so I think this is going to be a program that saves millions and upon millions of dollars to folks who are on fixed incomes, folks who need it the most. And that was the whole idea of this, of the homestead exemption, was to provide seniors with a tax break in order to make sure they don't get taxed out of their homes. The legislators, when they came up with this, understood that there'd be people who were on fixed incomes, and the older you get, the harder it may be. And we didn't want these folks who are in their 80s and 90s getting their homes sold because they couldn't, or being forced to sell their homes on the market because they couldn't afford their taxes.
How many of those homes were, I guess, for lack of a better word, taxed out?
Well, the majority of the homes are going to be eligible for a tax cap, which means the values are locked in and can only go up a certain percentage every reassessment, or roughly every 5 years. And so if someone purchased a home, and that's a great question, because in Charleston, real estate values have gone up so much. But if you purchased a home, say 30 years ago, or 25 years ago, when property values were much lesser, say you purchased a home for $100,000 20 years ago, if you went to sell it on the market right now, you might be able to get $600,000 for it, maybe more, depending on the area of town you live in. That's not how we base your taxes. We don't base it on what the market rate is. We have an appraisal, and then the assessor puts an appraisal on the home, and then it is capped at a 15% increase every 5 years. And so in Charleston, I mean, say you own the home for 20 years, it would take you it would take you all 20 years to, even with the compounding of it, for the value to have doubled. Meanwhile, everyone knows if you bought a home 20 years ago in Charleston, in most places, the value of it is more than doubled, probably. Especially on things that are on the peninsula or are close to the peninsula. So there already is a tax cap in place that helps folks. So, for instance, the taxable value of something may be $500,000, where the market value may be $1.5 million. Just depends on how long you've owned it. We take that value off of the lower amount, the taxable value. So again, this is on top of for many people, an already lowered assessment or appraisal.
Before your program came about, how many people were affected by this?
Well, there were about 25,000 people in Charleston County who had homestead exemption. We believe that there are well over 30,000 who are eligible. We're able to find 5,000 of those. And we can come up with a pretty good guess based on the population in Charleston and the ages. But what we have a really hard time doing is identifying people who are disabled. Your age is available and it's pretty public. People wear their age. Information on people's disabilities is not so public. And so we've been working on trying to get a list of folks, the best we can, who may be eligible. I think if we thought there were a lot of people who were over the age of 65 who are eligible but not receiving it, I think the amount of people who are disabled, the percentage-wise, is going to be even higher, because I think there's less opportunity for folks to be educated on it, just because I think there's much more of a public emphasis in the media and everything on folks. Are you over 65? Apply for a homestead exemption. But there's not really much talk of some of the more technical things. Folks who are permanently disabled, folks who are legally blind who are also eligible. And that process is a little more difficult, just because instead of just showing us a driver's license or a Medicare card, prove your age, we have to have some sort of documentation from either Social Security or from a doctor stating that. But we know there are a lot of other folks out there who are eligible for this. And again, the reason this exists is to keep people who are on fixed incomes, whether they be disabled or whether they be older, from losing their homes. And so what my office has done is tried our best to identify these people and actually reach out to them directly. And we've seen a tremendous success in it. We were the first ones in the state to do this. And my understanding is that Dorchester County has just sent out letters, or they're in the process of sending out letters. And so I do anticipate that most counties will be doing something similar, because now that we've sort of come up with a framework for it, I think there are people who are really interested in seeing how can I help the citizens of my county receive benefits they're entitled to. And I should say one more thing.
Sure.
This money comes off the tax rolls, but it's what they call a Tier 1 reimbursement. The state reimburses the counties for any money that comes off the taxes. This is a state program, which means, yes, if I cut $500 or $250 off the taxes of one person on Isle of Palms, not as much money is going to go to the town of Isle of Palms, because they're seeing less money. But that money is reimbursed to Isle of Palms from the state. And so, and then because we already have 25,000 people who have already been doing this, because we've been doing this for years, we know the money comes. It's actually very reliable. It's a Tier 1, which means they have to do that before they can pay off anything else. They have to reimburse the counties and in turn. So there's no such thing as free money. I'm not saying this is free money, but by taking this exemption, people are not impacting their local governments. They're not impacting the services they see. The fire district's not going to receive less money because they're eligible for this. It's a win-win for everybody.
Now, if someone did fill out this application and you went back and look at their records and see if they had anything, such as a loan that they had to pay off or something like that, how do you all go about that?
Well, if they owe taxes, for instance, we're not going to get involved in anything outside of the taxes. If they do owe taxes and we owe them a refund, and if you were eligible for this exemption, you are able to get a refund for the current year, and then the previous year. It's limited to those 2 years. If they do owe something, we can, of course, credit it towards that. I think most people are going to receive a refund, actually, because they've paid their taxes in full. And so if, for instance, this is on that sort of line of questioning, if they had a mortgage and the bank paid the taxes for them, that $250 or $200 in a refund would most likely go back to their escrow. And going forward, now a lot of these folks, though, given the fact that most of them are over the age of 65, a lot of them don't have mortgages anymore, so they're paying it out of their own pocket. And so some of these folks will, if they were eligible and missed that eligibility, they'll be getting a check back in the mail, which is good.
Good. I want to go back to the website again, the auditor's office, because the auditor's office calculates millage to satisfy annual budget requirements for Charleston County, including 43 tax districts. What are those 43 tax districts?
Well, a tax district is everything from includes everything from some of the municipalities. City of Charleston, and the City of Charleston has multiple tax districts. Isle of Palms, Johns Island and West Ashley are different tax districts. To things like St. Paul's Fire District, St. John's Fire District, St. Andrews Park and Recreation. You name it. Anyone who has sort of a taxing authority, the airport, although they don't tax, is a taxing authority. They used to years ago. Trident Tech. Small amount of your taxes go to support Trident Tech. They're considered a taxing authority too. So we have to work with all of them to ensure that they receive the amount of tax money that they need to make their budget work.
And obviously, from the history of the office, the Constitution of 1868 gave members of the South Carolina General Assembly the authority to create the first office of county auditor. By state law, each of the 46 counties in South Carolina has an auditor's office. When you look back at the history to right now, what is the biggest difference?
Well, I think the biggest difference is certainly in Charleston County is the growth. I feel like I'm probably one of the few ones in the state to actually have sort of a familiar connection to the office. My grandfather was actually auditor in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and the difference between then and now is, of course, everything was on paper back then. There were obviously less government services. Back then, it was more of the basics. We have a much more robust array of services, mosquito abatement and recycling. These didn't exist in the 1950s. We also have higher standards on what we expect from government services, and sometimes that's reflected in there. So a lot more people, a lot more technology. There is a lot more money being brought in and calculated through these offices than there ever has been. So it's become a little more complicated, but at the same time, I think it's opened the door for more innovation and more opportunities for technology and getting I guess that the role of the auditor has changed from being more of a backroom clerical sort of doing the dollars and cents to something that is much more apparent and in your sort of daily life. I think our interaction has increased compared to where it was certainly prior to the 1960s.
And you talk about growth. How does your office manage growth in 2019 in Charleston?
Well, I think we work in collaboration with a lot of other offices, and a lot of the issues that revolve around expansion in this area and growth, and annexations and the new developments, they happen outside of my office, but in many ways are connected in the fact that whether it's assigning tax districts or calculating taxes and rollback taxes on some of these properties, a lot of the areas, whether it's in Johns Island that used to be agricultural, are switching from agricultural to more of a developments, and when that happens, you see changes in taxes, and so I think we've had to be very proactive in not only being a resource for the public, but also especially being a resource for these taxing authorities and local governments, when something happens in the city of Charleston or North Charleston or Mount Pleasant, the finance people in those offices and the planning people have to really understand what the tax implications are, for any of these sort of changes. And so I think our role in the growth is much more in behind the scenes, and we certainly don't play have an impact on what happens, but we certainly try to make the growth as seamless as possible, especially for the local governments.
And obviously, earlier this year, Michael Miller became the Register of Deeds for Charleston County. When you look at him as Register of Deeds, what goes to your mind?
Well, Michael's doing a great job. I obviously worked closely with him, and to be quite honest, you just never really know what you're going to get when one of these offices changes over. And I knew Michael through the school board,
Right.
and I knew the good work he had done, but you never really understand what someone's real vision is for something like that. He's done a tremendous job. He's brought in some folks, and they're doing some things in that office that I think are revolutionary for South Carolina. He has a real respect for the history of that office. That's the county's, in many ways, the county's historian, so to speak. They keep the documents.
Right.
Old historic documents going back to the 1700s, safe and accessible to the folks. They also ensure that people's mortgages and people's debts and people's judgments and stuff like that are recorded properly. He has a tough job. He's done a great job of it so far, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. I think he is a great example of that transition between the way things had happened in the past and the way things are sort of happening in the future. And I think you look across the state, and I mean, you could even say that happened in my office with Peggy Mosley and myself. She was very supportive of me afterwards, because she especially loves the people who work for her in her office. And I mean, that's the way it is and should be. And so I was very blessed that she made the transition as easy as it could be. On the other hand, I think she and I have very different ways of doing things, and there's a generational thing. And I think we're seeing that generational shift, and we saw it a little bit with Mary Tinkler winning. I think in the next years you'll see a lot of these positions that were filled with folks as they retire or as they decide to do other things or lose elections, filled with people in a different age group and a different generation. And I think that's going to impact the way things are done in some of these county offices.
And when you look at the Charleston County Auditor's Office 5 years from now, what do you want people to say?
Well, I think 5 years from now, I want people to see a measurable growth. When you take it in increments of 4 or 5 years, hopefully you can look back and say, well, they kept working to find new things. I have a sign in my office, and I tell people that it's not a common government approach, and I don't like it when people say run government like a business, but I do think the competition aspect of businesses lead you to not rest on your laurels. And in an office like mine, and you see this in other offices around the state, and in other county offices, there's an ability and sometimes a willingness to just accept status quo, because you do your thing and your job is structured in state law. But the way I see it is, if you're not changing, if you're not looking to get better every single day, then you're falling behind. And our expectations in the Charleston County Auditor's Office is not only to be the best auditor's office in the state, but to be a leader. And we want other people to say, well, look at what they're doing in Charleston. We want to continue. We want to do the same thing. And so I think my 5-year goal is to keep hustling, to keep working, and always look at what we can do better. Always work on how we can work on being better advocates to the public, customer service, finding ways to be more efficient. One quick story. When I came in, we received 20 trays, and a tray has 1,000, maybe 700, 800 letters, 20 trays of return mail, and we'd send out the billing every year. which meant we had thousands of people out of 400,000 tax bills.
Right.
We had thousands of people where these bills were not getting to where they needed to go. Number one, it was costing us money to mail them. Number two, it was costing us a ton of staff time to try to research why these bills weren't going where they were going. Then we'd get phone calls later on saying, I never got the bill, that's why I didn't pay it, this, that, and the other. We'd have to go through this process. We've worked really hard, and this is a project every year because people keep moving and they don't tell me. But we've gone from 20 trays to under 5 trays, and that has a tremendous savings to the taxpayer of Charleston County just on postage alone. But the time we're able to dictate to not having to change addresses and try to track people down, it allows us to do other things. And so, anyways, the idea is keep moving, adjust with the times. Look at what we can do, how we can do things better. And I think that's a slightly different approach for folks in most auditors' offices and treasurers' offices and things like that, where you're not looked at as being groundbreakers. And we're not trying to necessarily break new ground, but we are trying to provide good government.
Good government. Oh, quickly, the government, you talk about the government. When you look at the Charleston County School District in this budget, what do you see?
Well, I work closely with the school district's finance people. Years ago, there wasn't as much communication between specifically my office and the school district finance folks, and there were opportunities for things to be miscommunicated, and there were times where the school district, the tax picture changes every day. Every time a building is sold, every time something is constructed. The whole picture of every time someone buys a new car, the school district's, by a small amount, the school district's finances change every time you sell a car. And so it's a moving picture. And so for years, there was some communication, but not enough communication to where, in 1 month, our crystal ball would tell us one thing, and then 5 months later, it might be a different situation. And they may think that they'd be getting more money or something like that. Because of 388, the money that is coming in through Charleston County is more, and through the auditor's office and through the treasurer's office, is more important than it has ever been, and getting an idea on that money. So we meet with the finance people from the school district, Don Kennedy is one guy, and we've met with the previous folks too, on a frequent basis. And we go over projections, we talk about how things are changing, so that they can present to the school board the most up-to-date budget on what they can do. Now, we've been lucky and have worked hard to really narrow that in and give them a very good projection so they know what to expect. And we tell them this is how much money to go, and they run a pretty tight ship over there. If we tell them they're going to get $102 million or whatever it may be, they're not going to go say, well, let's go to 105 because maybe it'll be a little higher than that. They run a very tight ship in terms of what the projections are. The problem is at the same time, the school district's is expanding in terms of the amount of students. The cost to the teachers and healthcare and everything else is going up. They're in a tight financial situation. The school district, of course, knows that, and the expectations are high, and they should be. But we've worked very close with them, and I'm very. I think that where they are in terms of their budget, in terms of tax dollars, they're very conscious of it, and I think do a good job of managing it at this point.
Charleston County Auditor Peter Tecklenburg, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Thank you, Quintin, as always.
Thank you.